First Person is produced in cooperation with the Far East Broadcasting Company, who rejoice in the stories of changed lives through the power of Jesus Christ. Learn more at febc.org.
I just get excited when I look at the evidence because it tells me I'm not checking my brain at the door. I'm following the evidence wherever it points. And it brought me from atheism to belief, and it has deepened my faith ever since. The more I look into it, the more convinced I am.
Our friend, author, and apologist Lee Strobel joins us now on First Person, this time to make the case for Christmas. I'm Wayne Shepherd. Welcome. We'll start the conversation with Lee in just a moment, but first, a big thank you for tuning in today and each week. We enjoy bringing you these interviews as we meet a variety of people who have great life experiences to share with us. To listen on demand to any of our programs, please go to firstpersoninterview.com or even subscribe to our podcast, First Person with Wayne Shepherd. And we're at facebook.com/firstpersoninterview. Lee Strobel has an amazing testimony of coming to faith in Christ after an investigation trying to disprove Christianity. At the time, he was a legal reporter for the Chicago Tribune. Since becoming a follower of Jesus, he's written landmark books such as The Case for Christ, and he's a teaching pastor. Today, we want to talk with Lee about the case for Christmas. When he joined me recently online, I started by asking him if he ever missed the newspaper business and Chicago.
I miss both those things back when newspapers mattered. And
yeah, you got out just in time, didn't you?
I know, it's true. All my old colleagues are all retired now. And
well, you've been so gifted as a writer, but even more so as someone who loves the Lord. I mean, we've told your story many times through the years of you began as an atheist and how your wife led you to investigate the claims of Christ, and all these books later that you've written, The Case for Christ, The Case for Faith, I can't cite them all, and you wrote one recently about the supernatural, which is doing really well, I understand.
Yeah, looking at the evidence for a realm beyond what we can see and touch.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating subject.
And now The Case for Christmas.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about that one here today. We won't begin to only scratch the surface of all that you cover in this book, but I really appreciate the way that you write these books in such a readable way.
Thank you.
These are books that we can pick up and we can really dig into, and they really strengthen our faith, and they're not hard to understand.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think that comes from my journalism training. There's an old saying, you want to put the cookies on the bottom shelf.
Yeah.
In other words,
Yeah.
make things accessible to people. So I go out and I interview scholars and experts, and I'm not a scholar. I'm trained in journalism and law, but I figure if I can get it to the point where I can understand it, then I can communicate it to others and we can all understand it.
Yeah. Well, you've known the Lord for a long time now, since your conversion.
Yeah.
How do you put yourself in the position of the skeptic when you write your book, so that you answer the questions that non-Christians are asking?
Yeah, I think part of it is I stay in contact with a lot of skeptics, and I'm friends with a lot of skeptics. And so that keeps me fresh in terms of what people are asking, the questions that they have, the objections that they raise. And, I was an atheist for, the first 30 years or so of my life. So I have a reservoir of memories of what it was like back then.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, we take Christmas so for granted.
Yeah.
We rush through the season, and we all know how busy the season is, and we don't take the time to re-examine the facts. And I think we can maybe pause a bit this year and take a moment to consider what an incredible story it is.
Yeah.
And do you have a favorite part of what you've uncovered in this book about Christmas?
Yeah, one of the most fascinating things that I've learned in my investigation of Christmas is that it's a Greek word, one Greek word that is often misconstrued and even mistranslated. And I think that has resulted in a lot of misunderstandings about the basic Christmas story. So what I mean is the typical Christmas account is that, Mary and Joseph are on their way to Bethlehem because of the census, and she's about to give birth as they arrive, and they go to an inn, and the mean old innkeeper says, sorry, there's no room at the inn. So she goes to a stable or a cave and gives birth and puts the newborn Jesus in a manger full of hay. Well, that's not exactly probably what happened.
Now you're messing with a lot of Christmas carols,
I know. But there's one Greek word, kataluma, and that Greek word has been translated as in a lot of early translations. The King James Version, 1611, for example, translated it as in. And so it says that she gave birth among the animals because there was no room for her at the inn. Well, the problem is that's probably not the best translation of that Greek word. It's only used one other time in the New Testament, and that's when the Bible talks about the Last Supper, which was held not in a commercial establishment, but in an upper room of a home. And so many scholars will say, no, actually that word means guest room or room. In fact, as far back as 1395, John Wycliffe, when he was doing his Bible translation, translated it as room. The New International Version, the NIV of the Bible, translates it as room. But many will translate it as inn. And the thing is, there probably was no innkeeper. Mm-hmm. What probably happened, if you visualize what a typical house looked like in first century Bethlehem, it was one large room, like a family room, where people would sleep and eat and so forth. And then it was broken down. There was a smaller part of the room, a couple steps down, and this is where they would bring the animals at night. And so they may have a couple sheep, a couple goats, and they were like pets almost, these people. And they would bring them into that part of the house at night. And the floor was slanted so it could be easily cleaned. And sometimes the animals would come up the stairs, a couple steps into the family area, and they were like pets sometimes. So that was fine. Some houses were larger, and they would have a guest room, a kataluma, which is the guest room, have a separate entrance. And that was the room that the Bible is talking about, I believe. So in other words, what was happening is Mary and Joseph were coming to Bethlehem. Joseph was of the line of David, and I had relatives there. They went to one of the relatives' homes, and they had a guest room, but there was no room because so many people were coming for the census. And so Mary had to give birth in the family room. And yes, there's a manger there built into the floor. And yes, some animals maybe did come up and hang around during the birth. We don't know, but it could very well have happened. And so that's just one small thing that I think clarifies what actually took place. Further, I interviewed a scholar who said, it would have been unthinkable for an innkeeper in the first century to turn away a pregnant Jewish woman in a time of need. That would be unthinkable. You could not
that
do
guy's
that.
taken a lot of heat through the years, hasn't he?
Yes. So the other thing is, many people think, the baby was coming as they arrived in Bethlehem. It was kind of an urgent situation, but that's not actually what the Bible says. I mean, if you read the account in Luke, it just says the baby came while they were in Bethlehem. Doesn't say they were there 10 minutes or 3 weeks or a month or whatever. Where this comes from is there was a book written in about the year AD 200, which is a book of fiction. And in that book, it talks about Mary and Joseph approaching Bethlehem, and they got 3 miles from Bethlehem, and the baby was coming, and so they went into a cave and gave birth in a cave. Well, that's a book of fiction that comes much later.
Yeah. Okay.
So
right.
we don't know, was this an urgent situation as they arrived in Bethlehem? It could have been, or it could not have been.
Well, why do these details matter?
Well, I think it's such an important event that we want to capture as best and as accurately as we can what actually occurred. It's mind-boggling when you think that the God of the universe comes down, is born of a virgin, on a mission to save humankind. This is the greatest story in history. And what makes it a great story is it's true. I mean, if it were just a book of fiction, it'd be amazing. But my goodness, this is a true story. And so I think we want to get it right and celebrate what God did through Jesus at that time.
Yeah. Of course, many people consider the whole story myth. And you talk about this in your book. How does this myth, so to speak, stack up against other myths that have lived through the years?
Well, that's a common objection that atheists make, is that, Christianity is just a copycat religion. There were all these myths that were in circulation during that time, and they just stole the idea of the virgin birth from these ancient myths? Well, the one that they cite generally is, and Da Vinci Code popularized this, was the myth of Mithras. Now, they say, well, look, Mithras was born of a virgin on December the 25th. He had 12 disciples. He died for world peace and was resurrected from the dead. Well, who does that sound like? Sounds like Christianity just ripped off those ideas. But you do the research like I did, and here's what you find out. Mithras was not born of a virgin. Mithras, according to the myth, emerged fully grown out of a rock. He was naked and he had a hat on. That's what the myth says. So unless you consider the rock a virgin, there was no virgin birth. Secondly, he was born on December 25th. So what? The Bible doesn't tell us the day that Jesus was born. We don't know it was December 25th or not. Did he have 12 disciples? No. According to one version, he had one disciple. According to another version, he had two disciples. Did he die for world peace? No. He was known for killing a bull. And was he resurrected? No. There's no account in the mythology about Mithras dying, and therefore no account of him raising from the dead. So it's just ridiculous. And you see these other claims about Alexander the Great was conceived by Zeus, the mythical god Zeus. Well, even Alexander the Great's own mother, Olympias, specifically rejected that story. It says it's not true. Some people say that Krishna, who is a Hindu god, was born of a virgin. And now his mother had 7 previous sons, so she was not a virgin. You just go through this list, and they all fall apart. Dionysus, who's the god of wine and fertility, that's another common one. People say that was a virgin birth. No, it wasn't. Zeus, this mythological god, supposedly impregnated a princess, and Zeus's queen was mad, and so she burned the fetus to a crisp. But Zeus rescues it and sews it into his thigh until it's born. Well, that's not a virgin birth in any sense of the word. So this stuff just evaporates when it's investigated.
Yeah. So you've really done your homework here, haven't you?
Yeah, I tried to.
Lee is making the case for Christmas, and he'll say more about it when we come back in just a moment here on First Person. Here's Ed Cannon on the vision for FEBC's weekly podcast.
The primary purpose of Until All Have Heard, of course, is to share the experience that FEBC has because we have staff on the ground in so many oppressive places. But in addition to that, we're trying to speak to you in a way that only the kind of testimonies you'll hear from around the globe can do.
Discover how the gospel is making a difference around the world. Search for Until All Have Heard on your favorite podcast platform, or hear it online at febc.org. My guest is Lee Strobel, a well-known author, Christian apologist, and his latest is The Case for Christmas. A journalist investigates the identity of the child in the manger. I want to talk about the virgin birth, but something a little, I suppose lighter in a sense.
Yeah,
is your stance on using Xmas in place of Christmas? Now you're really stepping on some toes here, I think.
I know, and some Christians complain. They say, "Oh gosh, when people say Xmas, they're taking Christ out of Christmas." And maybe that's the motivation of some skeptics and atheists.
I can see how they feel that way. Sure.
Yeah, maybe. But the problem is it backfires because X, traditionally going way back, has been an abbreviation to represent Jesus and Jesus Christ. And the reason is in the Greek language, the word for Christ, Christos, the first letter is an X. It's called chi in the Greek. So the first letter is X. The second letter is rho, which is our equivalent of a P. And so Cairo was the first 2 letters of Christos or Christ, became an abbreviation in early Christianity. The Christians would use that abbreviation of XP to represent Christ. And then in the year 1021, there was a scribe, and he was trying to save parchment because it was expensive. And so he abbreviated Christmas XP, Cairo, MAS. And then later that was shortened to just XMAS. But the X represents Christ. And so you're not really taking the Christ out of Christmas when you use the X.
All right.
In fact, interestingly, when Jewish people were brought to Ellis Island in the Great Migration into the United States, they were asked to sign a document, and many couldn't spell their names. So they said, well, just put an X. And they refused to do it because they knew that represented Christ. And so they put an O, which was more consistent with their culture.
Okay.
So,
all right. Well, I think you've given me a tool for witnessing. When we see Xmas now, we can say to people, hey, you know what that X really stands
exactly.
for? There you go.
That's the first letter of Christos or Christ.
All right. Hey, we've got to talk about the virgin birth.
Yes.
This is the hang up for many people when it comes to truly believing the story of Christmas and the story of Christ is the virgin birth. So what have you found in your investigation?
When we're looking at the virgin birth, is it possible, because Mary did not have the genetic material to create a male child? Well, you know what? We have great evidence from cosmology, physics, and biochemistry that God created the universe. And if God created the universe, he can certainly create the genetic material inside Mary to give birth to a son as a virgin. The other aspect of the virgin birth involves the prophecy about the virgin birth.
Yes.
So if we look in the Old Testament, we see that there was a prophecy by Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 7 about, that's translated, a virgin, the Messiah would be born of a virgin. And some people say that's just a mistranslation, because the Hebrew word there that's used is alma, which merely means young maiden. And they said, if you wanted to specify it was a virgin, you would have used the word betula, which would for sure mean a virgin. Well, there's a problem with that. First of all, there was no single word in ancient Hebrew that meant virgin. And alma, a young maiden, was presumed to be a virgin. And betula, it doesn't really refer always to a virgin, because it can refer to a widow. And so really the best word to be used is the word that is used, alma. And when the Old Testament was translated into the Greek, the Septuagint, this is before Jesus was born, it was translated as virgin in the Greek, because they understood that that's what was referred to there. The other objection is that many people will say, well, that prophecy was referring to King Ahaz. He was going through some problems back then, and it was a prophecy from God that things were going to turn out all right. It was fulfilled 700 years before Jesus was born or so, when a maiden got married and had a baby, and this was intended for King Ahaz. Well, that's not exactly accurate, because the first parts of that particular prophecy, that's Isaiah 7, verses 14 and 15, that is the Messianic prophecy. And then, and this doesn't get translated into the English very often because it's very subtle, there's a segue into the next two verses 16 and 17. That's the prophecy for Ahaz. And in that prophecy, it says, by the time this child becomes aware of what's good and what's bad, your problems are going to be okay. You're going to be taken care of. And people think, oh, that's the baby that's being referred to as being born. No. If you look earlier in Isaiah, what you see is that God told Isaiah, bring your son to your meeting with King Ahaz. And so Isaiah had his son there. And in these verses, he's saying, in effect, hey, Ahaz, by the time your son, referring to the one that's there, by the time your son is old enough to discern between right and wrong, everything's going to be taken care of. Everything will be fine with King Ahaz. And that prophecy was fulfilled. So there's two prophecies here. There is one about King Ahaz that was fulfilled back then. But then there is also a Messianic prophecy that is fulfilled later with the birth of Jesus from a virgin. And it's important to note that this passage in Isaiah chapter 7 is in a cluster of Messianic verses. In Isaiah 7, the Messiah is going to be born. In Isaiah 9, he is already born, and he's declared mighty God. And then in Isaiah 11, he's reigning in the power of the Holy Spirit. So this is within a cluster of Messianic prophecies, and it needs to be recognized that way. And the reason King Ahaz is so important is he was a descendant of David. And so if he had been killed by his enemies back then, the Messiah had to come through the line of David. It would have been a problem. So there is a Messianic overtone to this particular passage. And so I think this idea that Isaiah 7 refers refers to a virgin giving birth to the Messiah, I think that is legitimate.
Well, it all adds up to such compelling evidence. It really does. We don't have a lot of time left, 2 or 3 minutes here, Lee, but I know you spend a lot of time on college campuses, and much is being said these days about Gen Z and younger people and the questions they bring to the table. How do you interpret that, and what do you see in your experience, and how does this help them?
I mean, on the negative side, we see that Gen Z has more people declaring themselves atheists than in my generation, for sure.
Okay, all right.
We see the percentage of Americans who believe in God has gone down to the lowest ever, to 81%. But
when they're presented with the evidence, though, how do they respond?
This is the thing. I have a good friend whose ministry is to travel the country and to speak on college campuses and to high school campuses. And he said to me this. He said, Lee, I've seen more young people come to faith in Jesus Christ in the last 3 years than in the previous 18 years of ministry combined. There is something happening among young people. They've been lied to a lot. They've been misled. Look at the internet. Look at AI. They're looking for something they know they can trust, that's going to be true, that they can build their life on, that has purpose and meaning. And Christianity provides that because it's true. And so I'm encouraged by what I see among young people. Let them ask questions. It's great. We have a defensible faith. But I think the trend lines, in many ways, we see these little outbreaks of revival taking place at Asbury and elsewhere, and I think more is coming. So I'm optimistic.
And in the moment we have left, you deal with facts and evidence, and it's cold hard facts. But when it comes right down to it, this got to have a way in our heart.
Yes,
the Spirit's. We've got to worship as a result of what we've learned here, don't we? How do you do that?
Absolutely, because it is true. It means that God exists, that God is real, that He entered into our world, that Jesus Christ is fully God, fully man, that He went to the cross, He paid the penalty we deserve for the sins that we've committed. He offers forgiveness and eternal life as a free gift of His grace. I mean, this is the most wonderful message on the planet. And so I just get excited when I look at the evidence, because it tells me I'm not checking my brain at the door. I'm following the evidence wherever it points. And it brought me from atheism to belief, and it has deepened my faith ever since. The more I look into it, the more convinced I am, the more impassioned I am to drag as many people with me to heaven as I possibly can.
You're doing such great work. I hope you will be encouraged and will continue. Lee, what's next?
We have a motion picture coming out December 15th in movie theaters nationwide. It's called The Case for Miracles.
All right.
That's going to be a fun film that's going to look at documented cases of how God has performed the miraculous among us even today, which means He is present. He is with us. He is one whisper away.
So be watching for the film The Case for Miracles, coming out in just a couple of days. Our guest has been Lee Strobel, whose latest book is titled The Case for Christmas. A journalist investigates the identity of the child in the manger. We have had just a sample today of the content of this new book, and it makes for a great read at Christmas time or any time. We'll place a link to the book at firstpersoninterview.com. As you celebrate Christmas, please remember to pray for the ministry of the Far East Broadcasting Company, who helps bring these interviews to you on First Person. In Thailand, for instance, there's an emphasis on the Christmas message through FEBC's radio broadcasts and listener engagement. Learn more when you visit febc.org/Thailand. Now, with thanks to my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Join us next time for First Person.